Welcome to the 26-27 school year. My name is Colleen Jedi, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Director of Literacy Pathways here in Elmhurst School District 205. I'm excited to provide you with some information on how we as a district are continuously strengthening our multi-tiered system of supports for literacy in grades kindergarten through third grade. This informational video will be structured into three main parts. I will begin by giving an overview of the Illinois State Board of Education's requirements for early literacy screeners, followed by some information on updates we are making to our K-3 universal screener for word recognition. We will be implementing a new universal screener this year called Acadience Reading. And following that, I will provide an explanation of the MTSS framework utilized across the district, its alignment to all three tiers of instruction, and then finish up with a more detailed overview of the Acadience Reading Universal Screener Assessment and its components. I want to begin by sharing some information related to requirements for the ISB Early Literacy Screener Assessment in Illinois. In January of 2025, the Illinois State Board of Education shared its Illinois Comprehensive Literacy Plan that was developed over the course of several months with feedback and input from educators from across the state. And since that time, ISB has continued to create guidance related to literacy assessments, particularly in the area of literacy screening. Their guidance outlines specific skills and aligned subtests that should be measured at each grade level. Here you can see the specific screening measures required at each grade level. These areas have been identified by research as valid predictors of students' future reading achievement. And these measures can all be assessed in a brief snapshot of time and are areas that can be targeted with specific interventions when needed. Over the past several years, District 205 has strengthened its literacy instruction and intervention across all three tiers of instruction. And we continue to evaluate our practices to ensure they are responsive to student needs, as well as aligned with current research and state requirements. Beginning this school year, we will be implementing a new early literacy assessment that aligns to these essential foundational literacy skills. So why is there a need to make a shift in our D205 assessments for K-3 literacy? Our current assessments don't fully meet requirements of the ISB Early Literacy Screener. We also have a need to consistently measure students' rate of improvement over time as it relates to word reading fluency and connected texts. In terms of MAP, the MAP growth assessment is an adaptive assessment for every student and therefore does not provide common data on how well students are applying those word recognition skills and performing against their peers. In addition, this new assessment will act as an additional measure to confirm the effectiveness of our Tier 1 instruction, both across the school year and across all grade levels. It will also act as an additional measure to confirm which students require targeted and intensive intervention plans for the discrete skills of word recognition. And finally, it will provide us with a dyslexia screener for all K-1 students as part of our universal screening process. Let's take a closer look at what a universal screener for word recognition skills looks like for kindergarten through third grade students. A universal screening tool provides not only those quick and targeted assessments of the discrete skills that I mentioned earlier, it is also generally administered 3 times a year and has standardized directions for teachers to administer, and also establishes reliability and validity standards. Its purpose really is to identify those students who may be at risk of poor learning outcomes, but also acts as a way for us to identify any needs within our Tier 1 instruction that need to be strengthened. So why do we screen all students? Parents sometimes wonder why we would collect a universal screening on all children. It's often described as something similar to a well child checkup. So we take all children to the doctor regularly in order to identify if they're on track with their growing and developmental milestones. And that way we can provide some early intervention if needed in order to catch the child up quickly with specific skills that they may need additional support on, and also prevent larger gaps in their development from forming. In academics, we essentially do the same thing. So with reading, math, and social emotional behavior, we can use indicators of student need to identify students who may need some additional support now to prevent those larger learning gaps in the future. So beginning in September of this school year, D205 will begin utilizing Acadience Reading as our universal screener for K3 reading. Again, this screener is aligned to those ISB early literacy screener requirements I mentioned earlier, but it also integrates with our Tier 1 curriculum for word recognition, which is Foundations, and will also provide us recommendations for Tier 1 differentiation as well as Tier 2 and 3 intervention student groupings. Here is a summary of the updates to our universal screening process as a result of this shift. So you can see across that first row in K1, previously students were given the MAP growth primary assessment in reading as our universal screener for literacy. We are now shifting that for all K1 students to be the Acadience reading. And students will receive a composite score of several different subtests that I'll go over in just a little bit. In second and third grade, students will continue to take the MAP growth assessment. Again, that assessment does give us a lot of valuable information, but in addition, in order to ensure that we have a good snapshot of our students' oral reading fluency, students will also be given the Acadience reading measure of oral reading fluency. In fourth and fifth grade, there's no change to our literacy universal screeners. We will continue to utilize MAP growth as our universal screener. In addition, Acadience will now be given to all K3 students as a replacement for FastBridge benchmarking for K3 students with IEPs. So previously, students with IEPs utilized the FastBridge benchmarking. Those two assessments are very comparable, and so now all students K3 will utilize Acadience benchmarking as the universal screener. So now let's take a look at how this new universal screener fits into our multi-tiered systems of support for literacy in D205. Let's first take a moment to define multi-tiered system of supports, or also commonly known as MTSS, and how this framework is utilized to ensure all students succeed. The implementation of MTSS encompasses both academic and social emotional support for all students. This infographic illustrates the essential steps of MTSS implementation within individual schools. So students are screened 3 times a year at the beginning, middle, and end of the school year, utilizing a variety of screener assessments. During each of these 3 benchmark periods, schools screen all students to evaluate their level of risk using these universal screeners. School data teams then respond to that data to ensure each student receives the level of support they need. And for students receiving targeted or intensive intervention, schools monitor student progress to evaluate the effectiveness of the level of support provided, and then determine if changes are needed throughout the year. This is a cyclical and continuous improvement process where school teams are consistently evaluating the overall efficiency and effectiveness of the process. As noted earlier, there was a need to strengthen and shift our early literacy screening process to ensure that we are gathering the appropriate data to drive this MTSS implementation. So Acadience Reading will begin to drive this process for K3 literacy once the first round of assessments are given during the month of September. This slide provides a visual of the 3 tiers of intensity for instruction and intervention that are part of the MTSS framework. These 3 tiers work together to support all students. The green bar on the bottom of the screen represents Tier 1 high-quality instruction that includes programming and supports designed to meet the needs of all students. When we utilize high-quality instructional materials along with effective teaching strategies, Tier 1 instruction is designed to meet the needs of approximately 85% of our students. The yellow bar represents targeted and strategic Tier 2 instruction. Tier 2 includes small group, standardized, and evidence-based interventions that have demonstrated positive effects on student outcomes and are aligned with specific student needs. Approximately 10 to 15% of students will require this level of strategic support in addition to that Tier 1 instruction in order to meet grade level standards. The red bar represents the intensive Tier 3 instruction. Tier 3 intensive intervention is individualized based on student need. It is provided to students not responding to Tier 2 interventions and who have ongoing intensive needs. Approximately 5% of students will require this level of support in order to meet grade level standards. The continuum of support available through this multi-level system helps schools to create a fluid and flexible structure that allows students to receive services at all tiers, depending on need. Decisions about access to these supports follow a data-driven problem-solving process that was outlined on the previous slide. Again, the purpose of the universal screening tool is to identify those students who may be at risk for poor learning outcomes so that teams can plan for targeted interventions when needed. The universal screening tool also helps us to identify any areas that may need to be strengthened in our Tier 1 instruction at the grade level, as well as the school level or at the district level. We will utilize the results of our early literacy screener to identify students who are in need of additional support and also to drive that Tier 1 classroom instruction. Here you can see a snapshot of the high quality curricular materials that we utilize for word recognition across the district and how these materials align to the 3 tiers of instruction I just described. In order to ensure a coherent approach for students across all 3 tiers of instruction, we utilize curricular materials from Wilson Learning that provide increasingly intensive and individualized support for students as they work to become fluent readers. These resources are designed to ensure consistency across tiers of instruction so that regardless of who is delivering instruction, there is reinforcement of the same concepts, skills, and most importantly, teacher language and visuals related to those word recognition skills. This coherent approach is especially beneficial and crucial for our striving readers. The Acadians Reading Assessment will also provide data that strongly aligns to all 3 tiers of our word recognition instruction. Acadians Reading Assessments are part of a suite of products that Wilson Learning supports. The data that teachers collect from the Acadians Reading Universal Screener will act as part of a coherent assessment system that complements our Foundations unit test data and progress monitoring tools. Data that is provided from this screener will provide teachers with detailed recommendations for instruction and student groupings aligned to our Tier 1 Foundations curriculum. Data from these assessments are complementary and provide a more holistic picture of each student's word recognition skills. Acadians targets specific skills for each grade level and time of year aligned to the most important skills students should be mastering across the scope and sequence. This table illustrates the early literacy skills that are essential for skilled reading and the aligned Acadians measures that will be utilized across grades K through 3. This table shows those same Acadience reading measures, but maps them across the 3 benchmarking periods of fall, winter, and spring across grades K through 3. You can see by the color coding that these measures build in a sequential way as students continue to become more skilled at decoding and work towards becoming a fluent reader. Following our September testing window, families with students in grades K through 3 will receive a parent report that gives an overview of the assessment. This parent report will include an assessment overview, individual student score details, information on those specific measures that I mentioned on the slide previously, as well as an explanation of student performance in relation to benchmark goals. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this important update. We look forward to partnering with all of you this year to ensure that all of our students have the skills they need to become proficient, engaged, lifelong readers.